My Lords, the Noble Baroness, Lady Gardiner of Park, has chosen an appropriate moment to table this question, and I'm grateful to her. I declare an interest as I have a diagnosis, finally, of organophosphate poisoning leading to autonomic dysfunction. I'm also a patron of a number of charities and groups which represent the interests of patients with myalgic encephalomyelitis, also known as ME/CFS, but which I will call by its common abbreviation, ME. And I'm chairman of Forward ME. My Lords, rising out of my own illness and the battle that I had, and others had, to get toxicity of the once ubiquitous organophosphates recognised, a battle which I'm sure the Noble Elder Minister well recalls, I became interested in other medical conditions such as fibromyalgia and Gulf War illnesses, for which there is no diagnosis or treatment, let alone recognition. Foremost amongst these is ME. ME has been categorised as a neurological condition at least since 1968. It is recognised as such by the World Health Organization and by the United Kingdom government. Yet, my Lords, for all these years, sufferers from this awful, debilitating illness have been ignored, derided and mistreated. The sobriquet yuppie flu, acquired in the 1970s, has stuck in the minds of the public and, unfortunately, in the minds of far too many members of medical and allied health professions. Too often I hear statements such as, "Sometimes I feel the therapist did not understand how physical and biological symptoms are. She said she understood, but then suggested that a lot could be cured just by thinking differently. I don't really think she appreciated how severe the symptoms are, and when I said I couldn't do something, I really meant that I actually couldn't do it. She also talked a lot about needing to get fitter, which I thought completely missed the point." My Lords, many thousands of peer-reviewed scientific papers from researchers around the world which demonstrate that ME is a physical disease which has endocrine, immune and cardiovascular effects as well as neurological symptoms, albeit with some of the psychological effects common to many chronic diseases. It's distinct from chronic fatigue, which is a symptom of many diseases, depression or cancer, for example. Despite this, there is a school of thought dominant through the last 3 decades that this is a psychosocial behavioural problem, easily dealt with by cognitive behaviour therapy and graded exercise. On many occasions, I've spoken about the failure of successive administrations to recognise ME for what it is, a chronic illness with fluctuating symptoms of unknown or uncertain origin and of variable severity. There are theories that it has a source in viral or bacterial infection that persists, and which eventually affects all major bodily symptoms. Others think its source may be environmental, caused, for example, by those ubiquitous toxic chemicals such as OPs, which are, incidentally, designed to attack the nervous system of their target species. Simple answer is that we do not know. In the UK, funding for research into ME is concentrated on its psychological aspects. There's a school of psychiatry determined to claim the condition for its own, both in the UK and internationally. After many years of working in this sphere, I observed the means by which any valid arguments for biological cause are mocked and eventually overwhelmed by the noisier medical opposition. They ignore internationally recognised science on the grounds that it's not scientific. They find every reason for rejecting small-scale scientific research projects conducted in the UK because they're not representative. They hound members of their own profession who show a considerable degree of success in treating patients with ME out of business. By writing numerous papers, which of necessity, because there's no one else to do it, are peer-reviewed by their colleagues, they appear to have proved that there is no need for further research and that the doctors responsible for diagnosing and treating ME do not need to conduct any more than the basic range of tests on their patients. The previous administration did try to help patients with ME. The Chief Medical Officer commissioned a report published in 2002 on the subject. It recognised that ME is an illness that is as chronic and disabling as MS. It recognised a shortfall in research and in NHS provision, particularly for children. The Chief Medical Officer recommended the setting up of specialist centres to diagnose and treat people with ME. £8.5 million were allocated for the purpose. They developed small pockets of excellence where patients were pleased with the provision. These tended to be fine for patients who were able to get to the centres, usually hospital-based. But for the 25% of patients who are housebound, and worse still, bedbound, there was little help. Some health authorities were so slow with their project that their projects failed to get off the ground before the funding had dried up. Others, based on psychiatric units, were regarded with suspicion by patients. My Lords, what I'm saying is that because of the way that people have behaved over this illness, patients with ME aren't getting access to the ancillary helpers in the NHS. Two later reports, the latest published earlier this year by the All-Party ME Group, of which I was a member, again highlighted the lack of NHS provision for patients with ME. Both reports stressed the failure of the NHS to provide for children and the severely affected. NICE, in their CFSME guidelines, also recognised the variable severity of the illness and the lack of treatments available. They recommended that treatment should be tailored to the patients, with the patient's consent, and that allied health professionals, such as physiotherapists and psychologists, must have a knowledge of ME and be experienced. Current NHS treatments depend upon a multidisciplinary approach. I know from experience that a hospital referral can be very unsatisfactory unless the consultant has an open mind and looks at more than just one bit of a patient. All too often, when a patient fails to respond to the recommended treatment, he or she is blamed for the failure and a psychiatric referral ensues. There's no passing patients on to people who might be able to help them, like the cognitive behaviour therapists. There's an estimated 250,000 people with ME, most of whom are treated by professionals with very little, if any, understanding of their illness. Since specialist services are inadequate, many patients are left to fall upon their own resources. For those who are fortunate, like the patient who said, "By understanding how I could approach my daily activities in smaller chunks and hence planning for this, including fun activities, I ultimately became stable and could build from there." Or another who said, "One-to-one supervision from a very skilled and experienced therapist kept me on track, pulled me up when I needed it and gave me encouragement. They listened to me, believed in me, reflected my progress to me at times when I couldn't see it." My Lords, I cannot say how important being listened to and being believed are. I'm pleased to see that the Coalition intends that patients should have more say in the NHS provisional services. I also see that they're to discuss professional training with the Royal Colleges. However, until there's a cultural change amongst health professionals, patients with ME will continue to find it difficult to find help within the NHS. Does the Noble Lord wish to say something? Until the professionals take time to listen to patients and to believe them, they will never develop the skills needed to enable them to help patients along the road to recovery. I wish I had the solution to the suffering of people with ME. It seems that no matter how often the government ministers and senior officials confirm their acceptance of the seriousness of this condition, nothing will change until the culture, both within and outside the NHS, changes. I believe that, in this particular case, patients, some of whom have experienced the illness for decades, while others have made excellent recoveries, have a huge amount of knowledge to impart. The Canadian guidelines for diagnosis and treatment of ME have, for reasons that have never been explained, repeatedly been rejected by health professionals, and yet they are regarded by patients as providing the best course of action. May I ask the Noble Lord Earl whether the Coalition continues to accept that myalgic encephalomyelitis is a neurological illness as categorised by ICD-10 G93.3. If he does, will he say how Her Majesty's Government will ensure that there is sufficient qualified medical and allied professional expertise to treat patients with illnesses such as ME with the effectiveness and dignity they deserve?